let's talk about word formation in linguistics. Essentially, this refers to the ways in which new words are created or made. It's a fundamental aspect because it helps us understand how languages grow and evolve over time. The study of this process falls under the fields of morphology or lexicology, which focus on the structure and vocabulary of language. Specifically, the branch of morphology that deals with how words are formed is called derivational morphology. Now, when we discuss word formation, it can refer to either a state, meaning the current form of a word, or a process, which is how that word came into being. We can look at word formation from different perspectives. One way is diachronically, which means examining how words change and develop across different periods in history. Alternatively, we can view it synchronically, focusing on how words are formed and function at a specific point in time. Understanding these concepts helps us see the bigger picture of language development and how words serve as building blocks for communication. Whenever a new word enters a language, it doesn't just become part of it randomly. There's a specific process it goes through to be accepted and integrated. This process is often called a morphological process, or simply word formation. It's fascinating because new words can come from two main ways, either by modifying existing words or by creating entirely new ones from scratch. Sometimes it's a mix of both. And once these words are formed, they can then become a permanent part of the language. Understanding this process helps us see how languages evolve and adapt over time, which ties back to our overall theme of language development and change. Today, I want to talk about etymology, which is the study of the origin and history of a word. The word itself comes from Latin, but its roots go back to Greek. The Greek term etymon means original form, and logia means study of. So together, etymology is essentially the study of a word's original form. In English, many words are derived from Latin or Greek, which reflects the historical influence of these languages on our vocabulary. However, it's interesting to note that not all words in English are complete words themselves. Sometimes, they are just prefixes or parts of words that are blended together to form new terms. This blending often happens in scientific, technical, or modern language, which keeps the evolution of words dynamic and fascinating. Understanding etymology helps us see the connections between words and their roots, giving us a deeper appreciation of language's history. It ties into our overall theme of how language evolves and how words carry the legacy of ancient languages through time. All right, on this slide, we're diving into the fascinating world of word formation processes. These are the different ways new words are created in a language. First up, we have coinage, which is when entirely new words are invented from scratch, like Google or Kleenex. Then, borrowing involves taking words directly from other languages, such as ballet from French or sushi from Japanese. Next, we have compounding, which combines two existing words to create a new one, like notebook or sunflower. Blending is similar but involves merging parts of words, such as brunch from breakfast and lunch. Clipping shortens longer words, like turning advertisement into ad. Backformation is when a new word is formed by removing an affix, like changing editor into edit. Conversion, also known as zero derivation, shifts a word from one part of speech to another without changing its form. Think of to email from the noun email. Then there's the use of acronyms, which are abbreviations formed from the initial letters of a phrase, like NASA or scuba. All these methods are essential in understanding how language evolves and adapts over time. They show us the creativity and flexibility inherent in language, highlighting how new words keep our communication fresh and dynamic. Now, let's talk about coinage, which is actually one of the least common processes of word formation in English. It's basically the invention of entirely new words from scratch. The most typical examples you'll see are invented trade names for commercial products. For instance, some of the older examples include aspirin, nylon, and Vaseline. These are words that originally didn't exist before they were created for specific products. More recent examples are Kleenex, Teflon, and Xerox. These started as brand names but have now become common nouns in everyday language. A really interesting recent example is Google, originally the name of a company, but now it's used as a verb meaning to search the internet. This shows how a brand name can evolve into a common word through coinage. So, in essence, coinage involves creating brand new words that often start with commercial purposes, but can quickly become part of our regular vocabulary. It's a fascinating process because it highlights how language constantly evolves through innovation and branding. Eponyms are a fascinating special type of coinage. Essentially, they are words that are created based on the name of a person or a place. For example, the word sandwich comes from the 18th century, named after the Earl of Sandwich. He was the one who insisted on having his bread and meat together while gambling, and his name eventually became associated with that type of food. Another example is jeans, which is derived from the Italian city of Genoa, where this particular type of cloth was first made. These words show how individual people or places can influence language in a lasting way, and they help connect historical figures and locations to everyday vocabulary. This illustrates how language evolves through cultural and personal influences, enriching our communication and understanding of history. One of the most common ways new words enter the English language is through borrowing from other languages. This process involves taking over words from different cultures and integrating them into English vocabulary. It's a fascinating way that languages evolve and expand. For example, we've adopted words like alcohol from Arabic, which originally referred to a kind of distilled spirit. Boss comes from Dutch, and piano from Italian. You might be surprised to learn that croissant is French, and yogurt comes from Turkish. This borrowing process shows how interconnected our world is and highlights the rich tapestry of influences that shape the English language today. It's an essential theme in understanding how language constantly grows and adapts through contact with other cultures. Now let's talk about compounding. Essentially, it's when we create a new word by combining two or more root morphemes. These are what we call compound words. The interesting part is that it's a process of joining two separate words to form a single, new term. This method is incredibly common and productive, not just in English but across many languages. It allows us to generate new vocabulary easily and efficiently. For example, you might be familiar with words like bookcase, fingerprint, or sunburn. These are all compounds. Other examples include wallpaper, textbook, wastebasket, waterbed, and doorknob. And in modern contexts, we see compounds like Facebook or YouTube becoming part of everyday language as well. So, compounding isn't just a way to build words. It's a dynamic process that helps expand the language and adapt to new concepts and technologies. It really highlights how flexible and inventive language can be. So, let's talk about blending. Essentially, blending happens when parts of two words are stitched together, but without paying attention to where one morpheme ends and the next begins. It's like a sort of linguistic mashup. Usually, this involves taking just the beginning of one word and joining it to the end of another, creating a new word altogether. For example, take the word smog. It's a blend of smoke and fog. Then there's brunch, which combines breakfast and lunch. Another familiar one is motel, a mix of motor and hotel. Telecast is formed from television and broadcast, and infotainment merges information and entertainment. And lastly, we have mockumentary, which blends mock and documentary. Blending is a really interesting way language evolves. It's playful and efficient, letting us create new words that capture concepts quickly. It ties into the overall theme of how language adapts and changes creatively over time. Clipping is a fascinating type of abbreviation where we take a longer word and shorten it by clipping off one part. The key idea here is that the remaining part still means essentially the same thing as the original word. It's a way to make language more efficient, especially in casual speech. For example, instead of saying gasoline, people often say gas. Instead of advertisement, we say ad. And for fanatic, we just say fan. Another example is fax, which comes from facsimile. These shortened forms are not only easier to say, but also very common in everyday conversation. So, clipping helps us communicate more quickly while still keeping the meaning clear. It's an interesting way our language evolves to become more practical and efficient. This type of reduction is quite specialized. It usually happens when a word of one kind, often a noun, gets shortened or changed to form a different kind of word, typically a verb. For example, we take the noun television and reduce it to create the verb televise. Another example is donate, which comes from the noun donation. Similarly, emote is derived from emotion and babysit from babysitter. The key idea here is that backformation involves starting with a noun or another form and creating a new verb by removing a part of the original word. This process is fascinating because it shows how language is always evolving, often in very creative ways. It ties into our overall theme of how words change and adapt over time through various types of word formation processes. Now let's talk about a specific type of backformation. This occurs when a longer word is reduced to a shorter single-syllable form and then a suffix like y or ie is added at the end. For example, take the word movie, which originally comes from moving picture. Over time, it got shortened to movie, and then the suffix ie was added, making it more informal and easier to say. Similarly, we have telly, derived from television, and barbie, from barbecue. This process shows how language evolves in a playful and practical way, often creating more casual or affectionate forms of words. This kind of backformation is interesting because it reflects how we naturally adapt words to fit our speech patterns and social contexts. It's a perfect example of how language is dynamic and constantly changing to meet our communicative needs. Now let's talk about a fascinating aspect of word formation called conversion. Essentially, this refers to a change in the function of a word, such as when a noun starts being used as a verb, and importantly, without any reduction in the word itself. This process is quite common and is often simply called conversion. Sometimes, you'll hear it referred to as category change or functional shift. For example, consider words like bottle, butter, chair, and vacation. Originally, they were nouns, but through conversion, we now also use them as verbs. So you might say, we bottled the homebrew last night, or have you buttered the toast? Or someone has to chair the meeting, or they're vacationing in Florida. What's interesting is that this process isn't limited to nouns becoming verbs. Verbs can turn into nouns too. Think of words like guess, must, and spy, originally verbs, but now also used as nouns like a guess, a must, or a spy. And it extends further into phrasal verbs too. Phrasal verbs like to print out or to take over can become nouns, such as a printout or a takeover. This demonstrates how flexible and dynamic language can be, especially through conversion. So, in the context of our overall theme, understanding conversion helps us see how language evolves and adapts, allowing us to use words more creatively and efficiently in everyday communication. Acronyms are a fascinating part of language because they are new words created from the initial letters of other words. For example, we have abbreviations like CD, which stands for compact disc, or VCR, meaning video cassette recorder. When we say these, we usually pronounce each letter separately. But more commonly, acronyms are spoken as a single word, like NAID, NASA, or UNESCO. These are easier to say and become part of everyday language. Some acronyms have even become so familiar that they're used as regular words, such as laser, short for light amplification by stimulated emission of radiation, or radar, which stands for radio detecting and ranging. These terms are so embedded in our daily lives that we often forget they started as acronyms. You'll also notice that some acronyms are used with one of their component words repeated for clarity, like when we say PIN number. Here, PIN stands for Personal Identification Number, but since number is already in the acronym, we add it for emphasis. Similarly, we often say ATM machine, even though ATM already means automatic teller machine. Understanding how acronyms work helps us see how language evolves to become more efficient and accessible, especially as new inventions and concepts emerge.